Should you buy Dishonored 2 in 2023? Dishonored 2 was the heavily anticipated sequel to the original Dishonored, one of my favourite stealth first-person games. I was incredibly excited to see what Arkane Studios had up their sleeves for a sequel, exclusive to the PS4, Xbox One and next-gen PC hardware, but unfortunately on PC specifically, it launched in a pretty poor state. Dishonored 2 suffered severe PC performance problems like FPS drops, texture problems, and most hardware, even the highest end, was struggling to run it. Some people got lucky, but I wasn't one of them. Back in 2016 and 2017, I did have a GTX 1060 at the time, but still, the GTX 1060 at that time was still a pretty good card. Despite its unfortunate launch, I've seen the Dishonored franchise slowly pick up more steam with new players experiencing both Dishonored 1 and 2, but it's 2023 now. It's been out for almost a decade, so I do think it's time to find out if Dishonored 2 is really worth buying in 2023. Dishonored 2 nails that feeling of being a supernatural assassin, exploring your surroundings and making the environment work for you. It never gets old. 9 levels masterfully crafted with a level in here that is so damn cool I'm gonna have to gush over it for about a minute later on. Dishonored 2's combat system is solid, making some pretty vital improvements for some players from Dishonored 1, and the stealth system got some pretty sweet upgrades as well, and not only that, but you can also choose between 2 different characters here, Corvo or Emily, each with their own unique powers and identity, adding double the playtime or even triple the playtime if you want to attempt a no powers run of Dishonored. Dishonored 2 expands on the story of Dishonored 1 in ways I never expected when I first played it, which really surprised me as well. So it's clear Arkane put a ton of care and genuine love into this IP, which becomes clearer and clearer after the release of Redfall. So that's a nice little summary of the video if I do say so myself. So if you enjoy this video, stick to the end, and I'd really appreciate it if you could boot that like button and maybe even subscribe. Plus you can always join the Discord with the link in the description. I mean, we do have about 80 people in there, most of which do not talk at all, so if you're introverted, you're set. Anyway, let's talk about Dishonored 2.
Arrest Emily Caldwin and her father for the Crown Killer murder.
Dishonored 2's story is focused on a new villain called Delilah, who is apparently the aunt of Emily Caldwin. This is the girl that you saved after she was kidnapped in the original Dishonored. This time Emily is all grown up, the rightful ruler of Dunwall, and everything seems well until you hear the name Crown Killer. A killer who is killing people just like Corvo did when he assassinated multiple political figures in the first game, which I think is a really cool idea that wasn't explored anywhere near enough, but that's just me. Everything gets turned upside down when Delilah decides she wants the throne, and she doesn't care how she's gonna get it, and well, from there I really could spoil stuff, but I don't want to do that here, so I won't do it here. But is it any good? Well, for me, Dishonored was never about the plot, and honestly, never really about the characters despite how cool some of them are. For me, it was always about the world you inhabit, the world you get to immerse yourself in, and how you interact with that world. Every action you take, whether it's lethal or non-lethal, will have effects on the world, much like the original Dishonored, and that's what I think Arkane really want you to experience. Arkane did put more effort in here when it comes to presentation of the story, from its visuals, its OST, and the voice acting feels significantly better here. Most likely because your character, whoever you pick, has actual lines of dialogue here, which I personally really like. In the original Dishonored, your main character, Corvo, didn't have a voice actor. There was no line spoken, it was a bit awkward. They don't speak too often, but they don't speak too little. I'm not saying they're Master Chief from Halo, but it's pretty close, as close as you can get without it seeming a little bit weird, you know what I mean? The new villain Delilah I really couldn't care for, unfortunately. What I loved about the original Dishonored story wasn't how you get your superpowers or the guy behind it all. I loved the political aspects to it. Why was Emily kidnapped? What's the goals behind it? Who's actually behind it? Who do I trust? Who do I kill? Who do I let live? And the story never lets that go until the final mission of that game, and I thought it was superb. I've always had a soft spot for stuff like that, and unfortunately Dishonored 2 really doesn't make use of that here. They really kind of ditched the political stuff in favor of a more super focused story where the powers are the focus, which is a bit weird, but you know, I get that they wanted to make it bigger. It's more about Delilah than anything else. You don't really get involved in conversations between characters this time around because you've already established you can trust them, which makes the conversation infinitely less interesting, which, to be honest, does suck. It doesn't help that Delilah really is just a big bad guy. Like, there is pretty much nothing really interesting about her, I mean, in my opinion. She just appears, says some evil shit, has powers, and just moves on with her day until you see her again, which is just disappointing. I just think Arkane leaned a little too much into the power aspect here, because they wanted Dishonored 2 to feel bigger and bolder, but unfortunately it just leaves a lot of subtlety and nuance behind, resulting in a far less engrossing, immersive experience. But that's just me, you know? I'm not the be-all, end-all here. I'm sure some people out there prefer this over the original story, and that's fine. What I do think is objectively better is the gameplay. Dishonored 2 has some of the best and unique first-person gameplay I've ever experienced. It has terrific sword combat, which is notoriously hard to pull off in first person, but it combines that with a stealth system that is simply fantastic, with creativity bursting through the deepest layer of code you can find. Around every corner is a new side mission, a new choice you make willingly or not, a new black market shop, or a new tactic to be used in another run. I very rarely praise a game this hard. I really think the Dishonored franchise in general has been overlooked by so many players. Anyway, exploration is fantastic and is designed incredibly well. The world is built for your powers, whether you play as Corvo with Blink or Emily's new set of powers, which admittedly I didn't use this time around because I wanted to play as Corvo. But even after that, you have an option to play with no powers, which means almost everywhere needs to be accessible with no powers. And for the most part, Arkane seem to have nailed that. You can collect runes and bone charms for upgrades to your powers or physical abilities, paintings for cash, read newspapers for world building, and so much more. You could just be minding your own business and bump into a side character that seems insignificant, only for it to be a fairly big deal with that minute you've got with them, which is pretty awesome. Everything feels alive in every mission, every character is up to something, guarding or living or setting traps or fighting, worshipping or dying. Everything feels natural and it's just fantastic. The world design and level design go hand in hand because each mission starts outside of the main area you need to get to, so you can explore the boundaries of those levels for more world building and upgrades. To quote Todd Howard, everything just works. And it really does. Everything just blends together so nicely despite all the options you have to really give this game a reason to just break, but it never does. Each mission has a unique premise behind it, but two missions in particular really stood out to me. And if you've played Dishonored 2, you know where I'm going with this. The Clockwork Mansion mission and the time travel mission. I don't want to spoil too much, but the Clockwork Mansion mission has me scratching my head every time I play it. Not because it's irritating, but because of the amount of time and creativity it must have took to pull it off. It's incredible, and I still think there is no mission out there in any game that is quite like that mission. You manipulate your environment at your own risk, creating opportunities or potentially new threats, and once again, I just think it's fantastic. The time travel mission has been done a few times in other games now, but that doesn't take any credit from Dishonored 2, at least I don't think it does. The closest mission I can think of is from Titanfall 2, which weirdly enough came out the same year as Dishonored 2. But yeah, the time travel mission is incredible as well. You can freely transport yourself to two different timelines, one in the present and one in the past, and the things you do in one timeline affects the other, which means you can have so much fun just messing with it alone. Teleporting in and out, messing with the AI is some of the most fun I've had in years. Stealth and combat, like I've said, is pretty fantastic. Stealth relies fully on your ability to get creative. You're not going to be walking into corridors and hiding behind cover or shadows. Most of the time, you're going to be sprinting across rooftops using every ability you have to avoid or take out enemies as fast as possible without being seen. You really don't have time to think a lot of the time, no matter how much you plan your attack. If you don't have the right gear, the chances of getting out without being seen, especially in later missions, is almost impossible. And I love that. The stealth aspect is pretty difficult, especially if you're not great at stealth in the first place. It can be punishing, but pulling it off just feels so incredibly satisfying. Walking out of a giant complex, completing your mission and getting out like a ghost has never felt so cool in my experience. You have a ton of abilities and gadgets, too many to mention in this video, that help you get through those missions within stealth or combat, whichever one you want to choose, but all of which are upgradable with different effects and is further affected by the bone charms you collect through your playthrough, which can add a whole new level of creativity and options throughout your playthrough. Like, you could play this game like 10 times differently. It's insane. But that's the thing, it's really hard to talk about the stealth gameplay because it can really be different for everyone. You could have a completely different idea of stealth with the pacing and the variety you want to complete missions, but I really do think Dishonored has something for everyone. It's a cliche saying at this point, but I believe it. I just can't see someone not enjoying some aspects, at least some of them, of Dishonored. Like, you've got to enjoy something. If you're an action kind of player, the action here is fantastic too. Dishonored 2 has some really solid swordplay, blending up close and personal with your abilities and gadgets like pistols and crossbows, while also offering other powers that can change a fight completely. completely. It might be the biggest improvement for Dishonored 2 actually. Dishonored 1 had a good combat system, but enemies often spammed the pistol attack which you couldn't dodge or stop unless you had a ranged weapon too, and when I say spam it, I mean it's literally their every move, which just got tiresome. But Dishonored 2 basically got rid of that issue entirely, which is fantastic, so now it's just a blast. There's decent enemy variety as well, so you're rarely fighting the same enemies every mission, each with their own abilities and unique looks, so it never feels stale and keeps you on your toes. It's pretty amazing. Arkane blended all this together so well, it's just, it must have took so much time to balance it. So not only do you have a great stealth and terrific combat system, but you can also play this game without killing anyone, and Arkane took steps to accommodate that here even further. Now, if you do get caught and break stealth, you can actually fight enemies and knock them out, right? I know that sounds dull as fuck, but the original Dishonored didn't have this option. You either ran away or die, so this little addition does wonders to the moment-to-moment gameplay loop, especially if you prefer a more aggressive kind of playstyle. It made doing a passive run far more enjoyable. You know, I'm weird and insane, so I gave up on that after like the second mission and started murdering everyone because why not? Oh, and yeah, you can kill every character. No one is safe. All your buddies in your hub world that you can meet and be friends with, you can kill them. It's pretty damn cool. So that's all I can really say without spoiling a ton from Dishonored 2, so I absolutely think you should buy Dishonored 2, and if you want more should you buy suggestions, come check out the channel and maybe stick around. Thank you.